Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. Folks, we're back. It's another week of great episodes. If you missed our episodes last week, you missed some doozies. We had both Wanda James and Maha Hawk on the show last week. We covered a ton. We covered a ton of topics. They were all amazing, great episodes. If you missed those episodes, of course, you can always check those out at youtube.com/elevate your grind. Coming up, we have our next C-Lab virtual event on March 11th. If you want more information on that, you can check that out at joinclab.com. Very shortly, probably in our next episode or two, we'll have speakers and more details on that event, but it's definitely not one you want to miss, folks. If you're in the cannabis industry, you want to network with like-minded folks, or you just want to learn more, or you want potential to be on the show, you should definitely join C-Lab. Again, you can find that information out at joinclab.com. All right, folks. This is the first episode of 2 this week. We come back again with you live tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. After tomorrow's episode, everything's going to be going at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to try to get a little bit more standardized for you guys. That is our goal this year. But we'll be back tomorrow with Sky Pinnock tomorrow. So without any further ado, part of the reason I started this show was because I was doing a lot of networking myself, and I came across a lot of really cool people that I had great conversations with. And the beautiful thing about this industry is I would have good conversations with people, and the more people you met, the more they'd introduce you to more like-minded people. And the next thing you know, your network was growing exponentially. For those of you who remember, we did an episode, I don't know, maybe 30 episodes ago with Nick O'Dilly from HBK. Nick introduced me to today's guest. I actually believe we shared a nice dinner in Boston, either with him or if not, with the rest of his crew. But please welcome my guest today, Scot Crow of Dickinson, Wright. Scott, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the show today. Much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Tom. Happy to be here.
Scott, were you at that dinner at the NCIA Boston event?
I may have missed. There was one of the dinners I was at, one I wasn't at, but they all tend to blur together when you're having a good time. So it's highly possible I was there and just we didn't get a chance to talk, I don't think, at the dinner. So
no worries, man. I remember that you're so I went out with a bunch of your colleagues then, and it was from a food standpoint and a conversation standpoint, probably one of a very memorable night that I've had in the cannabis space at conferences. Because when I say that, it wasn't because we were partying hard. It's just we had a lot of good food, and we were socializing and talking about the industry and everything else, and it was just extremely enjoyable. So I was hoping that you were part of that. But it's interesting because people look at lawyers, and in this space, in the cannabis space specifically, you guys kind of architect the industry, right? You are making sure people stay within regulatory framework. You have the connection to capital allocators. You're structuring deals. There's a lot of things that you're doing. Where are we at the point in the cannabis industry? Is it still mostly private investors and family offices that are supporting this industry? Or are we starting to see institutional capital or bigger names come in different ways, shape, or forms? I mean, is that what we're seeing with these SPACs? Just give me an idea of who's putting money into this industry right now.
I think if you've watched some of the news wires over the last several weeks, it's clear that institutional money is now starting to show up across the industry, and the SPACs are certainly just another indication that there's a desire for institutional investors to start to play in this space. Now, that said, it's still somewhat limited because of the fact that if it's a private equity group, their governing documents typically prohibit investments still to this day in this space, taking aside the hemp and CBD space, which is open for all to invest. But in the THC and the psychoactive space, it's still relatively limited. So, but the institutional investors, like I said, are finding ways to play. And most of that is in the public sector, the public market.
Yeah. It's interesting where we are in cannabis because we've got 37 or so states that have some sort of legalization, which, we all know growing up, there's 50 states and 37 is the majority of 50, but it's still federally illegal. So at some point, the average person kind of forgets that, right? Even today, I was just having a conversation with my wife. I work at Spring Big during the day, and there are limitations to what we can put in the text messages that we're sending out on behalf of these cannabis companies. And she was asking me why. She's like, it's legal. People are selling it. It's a legitimate company. I'm like, this is the same argument that I have every day, that, you know, it is legal. It's legal in 37 states, but it's still federally illegal. I imagine that, you know, and I want to jump back into your background a little bit, but on this topic, as wealthy folks and investors are looking at this space, part of the biggest thing they always want to do is make sure they're protected. With this still being federally illegal, I imagine a lot of the deal structures in this space, which is why lawyers are so prominent, had to be very complicated, if you will, for lack of a better term, that you really have to get creative when you're looking at investing in this space.
Yeah, the structures today remain complicated, and that's primarily because of the regulatory environment that exists around license in general, and what constitutes a quote financial interest or a controlling interest. Each state has a little bit definition, but what they're getting at is, do you have a material enough ownership interest or controlling interest over a cannabis license to cause you to be someone that needs to be actually on the license itself, which for, you know, in the early days, and when I say early days, 8, 9 years ago, when we were raising capital, it was always the same conversation. You know, someone's excited about the space, they want to invest, they go talk to their spouse, they talk to their accountant, they talk to their lawyer, they come back and they're out. Can't do it, can't risk being on the license. They have too many other things going on that they don't want to put at risk. So you have to take a step back as a lawyer, and solve this problem for your client, because the answer can't be that this is what they're going to be faced structurally. So when we got involved in the early days, it was, we got to learn with a lot of great clients along the way on how to actually bifurcate structures and create complex vehicles not designed to skirt the regulatory environment, but actually to work within the rules that are provided, much like you see in the healthcare sector, where, you know, billions of dollars pour into that sector every year, and it's done through highly complex structures that are designed not to, again, skirt the rules, but to do it in a manner that's compliant and works for both the regulatory side and your financial investors. But um, for a lawyer, that's a complexity is our playground. The more complex, the better, from a legal standpoint. So.
Oh, I am sure. And I want to dig into this a little bit more, but let's back it all the way up. I tend to do this because, you know, especially since the pandemic, this is my 1 hour a week where I get to talk to quote unquote strangers and meet new people. So I tend to start halfway into the conversation because I know a lot of the background and everything else. But let's kind of dig into you, right? You know, I'm not calling you out on age or anything else, but you have a little bit of gray in your beard. So I imagine you passed the bar a little bit more than 5 years ago or so, and you've been practicing for a little bit. When you were studying law and decided to go into this profession, I'm sure setting up cannabis companies and helping them structure deals and everything else was not even on the horizon. What brought you into this space? You know, was it a story of a family member, a story of a friend? Was it, you know, one client came to you with this particular deal and just one led to another? Give us the backstory of what pulled you into this industry.
You know, for me, it was, I kind of backed into it. I was a healthcare M&A lawyer my entire career. I've been a user of cannabis and cannabis products since, you know, probably, you know, earlier than I should have been, but it's always
Yeah.
been a part of my life. And, you know, I never saw it as something that hindered the success or my trajectory. Just like anything else, it's, you use things in moderation and correctly, and try and do it the right way. But it was always a part of my life. And then it was 8, 9 years ago, we attended a conference out on the West Coast, and it became clear that there was an opportunity, as there were states that were on the Midwest that were looking at legalizing and getting comfortable with it. So we went back and made a pitch to our then CEO, who kind of cleared the path for us, which a lot of the larger big box firms weren't. They were just not interested in playing in the space. But we had a management group that was entrepreneurial enough to give us the opportunity to step into it. So for me, it kind of was a lifelong dream that came true. I love doing M&A. I love doing M&A transactions. I love complexity, and there was an opportunity to apply those skill sets to this industry and help it advance forward, which was, not often as a lawyer do you get to be a part of something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And especially in this space, and this is something that I've tried to call attention to a lot on the show. Um, there's a negative connotation around corporate, and corporate cannabis is a bad word. When reality, I look at someone like you, and I remember having Paul Rosen on the show, who's also was a practicing attorney in Canada. You were a closeted cannabis advocate, and you were obviously a user. And I'm sure when I say closeted, I'm sure people close to you knew, and your family knew, and everything else. But you can be out there loud and proud because you have licenses, you have a profession, and everything else. And when the opportunity arose, it's not somebody coming in and trying to capitalize on something they don't believe in. It's someone who took a professional path because the other path wasn't available to them without a high level of associated risk. And then all of a sudden, hey, this door into this world that I've always wanted to be a part of opens up, and I can take what I've been doing for the past however many years with me and bring it and contribute to it. To me, that's an amazing story, right? Someone like you, maybe we had some lawyers that weren't practicing as much, but for someone with your background, healthcare, M&A, and everything else, it makes sense for someone like you to join this industry to say, hey, we could do this better. We could structure this better. This is more advantageous to you to do it this way. Based on my experience with healthcare, if you do it this way, this is going to be the benefits for you. Oh, by the way, those plants look amazing over there. I'm going to go purchase some, right? I mean, you get to do both of them. So that's why I love seeing folks like yourself come into this industry, because you do have the passion for the plant and everything else, but then you also have all this quote unquote corporate expertise that really does benefit the industry, right? And taking that even further, bridging the gap between family offices and cannabis companies, and bringing family offices into the space to put money into these companies to advance the industry forward is extremely important. I've spent time with family offices, and I'll let you comment on this. You see them coming in more now because people are starting to see the returns, and it is a great investment vehicle. For me, there's a trend, or there has been a trend for a while now, of family offices trying to go more and more into direct investments because they're trying to skirt investment fees and fund fees and everything else like that. So instead, they're hiring their own investment teams and they're doing direct investing. I don't see better opportunities in the cannabis space. However, when we talk about family offices, for the most part, we're also talking about old money and old money values. And cannabis
Yep.
to old money, for me, and I'm generalizing, folks, I'm sure there are some forward thinking ones. Cannabis is a drug, and it's been a drug, and it continues to be a drug. And they still consider that, a lot of the people that were in my circle in the family office world, to be on the same level of cocaine or heroin or any of those other things. So, I guess my question here is, you've worked with family offices in the past. Family offices love healthcare, the same way that we love cannabis. So when you started to approach them about cannabis, especially from a medical side or anything else, what were those conversations like? Was there a lot of like, no, you've got to understand the research, you've got to understand the opportunity? Did you have to deal with a lot of those old money values?
For the most part, I mean, you're dealing with old money values, but there's also this desire to get involved in the industry and a belief in this sector. It's funny, when I first personally decided I was going to get involved in this sector, the first thing I did was to contact some of the primary relationships I had as an attorney, just to, because I didn't want to do this quietly. I wanted to be out in front. I wanted to be at the tip of the spear. I didn't want to be a lawyer that was like creeping in the shadows and helping advance the ball. But I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was walking into. So I polled a lot of my clients to ask what their feelings were about cannabis in general and medical cannabis as well. And it was, the results I got were not what I expected. Most people were in favor of it, believed in it, and didn't have any issues in advancing that forward. So for me, it was a green light to kind of go forward. But for any investor that I've had conversations with, and it's funny, you talk about the dinners at the cannabis events. I don't know if it's because you have people coming from all walks of life, but some of those dinners have been some of the best dinners that I can recall ever having at any sort of conference, because it touches a number of different topics and people find their way to this space from all walks of life and carry all
Yeah.
kinds of different viewpoints. So it's just an opportunity to learn. Now, if you're going to invest and you've never tried cannabis, I always tell those clients, like, you need to try the product, because you can't really appreciate or understand what you're buying into from a legal standpoint to kind of take the pressure off what we're really talking about here, because it is a vast difference to, between cannabis and, you mentioned cocaine or heroin, or like,
Yeah.
those are two completely different drugs with completely different outcomes. So until you've, not to say that you have to use it or try it, but I would suggest you do, to kind of take that fear of what is this that I'm investing in. So
So it's interesting, in those conversations, you talk about having people try it, and circling back, I agree with you. Those dinners are amazing because to me, this is truly a collaborative it's a collaborative industry from a knowledge standpoint, because we all love cannabis. We're all learning everything we can about the industry, but each one of us who got here, especially those of us who didn't have the opportunity to go right from college into cannabis, like a lot of the young kids I interview on this show, you bring with you a wealth of information that you can contribute to this industry. You with legal, me with technology, much more boring. But whereas going with this, getting people to try the product, I imagine with those conversations, and I mentioned this a lot on the show, it's not just smoking a joint anymore, right? When we talk about cannabis, when we talk about the cannabis industry, circling back to what you said before, recreational adult use is a small part of what we consider the
yeah,
cannabis industry. You've got recreational, you've got medical. I would say there's a nutraceutical component, and we call that more of like the CBD and the CBN and the different cannabinoids there.
yep.
And then we've got industrial hemp, which is, not even beginning to take off yet, right? But going back to, we'll call it adult use and even medical use at this point, when you have that conversation with folks, I'm sure it's not like, oh, you've got to smoke this joint, but it's like, hey, there are edibles, there are topicals, there are tinctures, there are sublinguals, there are all these different things. And you can truly start looking at it from a medical standpoint where you have a standard 5 milligram or 10 milligram edible. It's not just, my cousin Joey made a batch of cookies anymore, and they're anywhere between 500 and 500 milligrams. Go have fun, right? Because Joey doesn't know how to
Yeah.
use a mixer properly, and this
Yeah.
cookie's got most of the weed in it, right? So, did you have to kind of have those education style conversations where it's like, this is not your dad's cannabis. It's not just a bag of weed you're buying. These are the products that people are putting out there. We've got beverages, we've got all this stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely there's multiple ways of consuming. It's not just let's smoke a joint, although that still remains probably one of my favorite ways to consume, just because of the social aspect of having a
Yeah.
conversation with someone and partaking in something together. But a good example is, I've got neighbors that have never used in their entire life, never tried it, but now are huge advocates because they're sleeping better at night. It's solving some issue for them that they didn't want to use some other addictive means to fix, or didn't know how to fix. So,
Yeah.
but
It-
yeah,
it's
the back to the question on capital. I mean, look, any industry that you're trying to advance forward is going to require capital, and unfortunately that comes from the same sources it always has historically, right or wrong, whether you believe in it or not. If you believe in the industry and believe in that it should be available to everyone in the United States, then you got to accept the fact that it's going to require those partners to really create a legal regime, where it's safe for everyone to go in and buy cannabis and participate in it. So
interesting. When with the investors that you talk to often, obviously at first there was a big, there's I would say ancillary companies had a lot of the attention because at the end of the day, they're like, oh, you're not investing in a cannabis company, you're investing in a tech company or an HR company or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, if the cannabis companies didn't get funded and they weren't successful, there's no reason for an ancillary company. I mean, unless it was someone like you that just I don't mean to detract, but you you guys were a law firm and you added a cannabis practice. So if cannabis went away, sucks, but just the practice goes away. The whole law firm stays. But a lot of these companies, they popped up around the cannabis space. Would you say there's more of an interest now in the actual plant touching companies? And like when you're talking to family offices and some of the more sophisticated investors, are they looking for the next potential MSO, or are they still looking at, and we don't need to call anybody out by name, but a lot of the people who are more well-known in the industry? I'm very curious to see if
look, there's tons of, that's what's great about the industry is it's so fragmented. There's still tons of opportunity to continue to build out. And like, this is the beginning of the curve. Not, and someone had asked me this question, a client, like, should I be concerned that all the money's going to dry up again? Well, it always could, like it could dry up again for sure. But I think the last 12 months and what you saw occur with COVID and cannabis companies faring well across the country and really across the world, it's put a white light that there's true opportunity in this marketplace. So there's newfound interest that may have feigned before. I think that's coupled with the fact that you're seeing more and more talent flock to this sector, where people like me are saying, I'm going to take my talents and apply it to this industry. And that takes time and education for all those things to occur. But there is still definitely a lot of opportunity in this space to you know uh, get relatively large returns just because of the growth and that's out there.
I feel like there's going to be opportunity for a while now. There are a lot of people, obviously, in the internet and on finance shows and everything else that talk down about the cannabis industry or say that it's a bubble, things are going to burst, there's going to be a correction and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, I mean, your oldest truly legal cannabis companies are what, 11, 12 years old at this point, right? I don't know any industry in the world that has run its course over the course of 12 years, right? People are still investing in new healthcare companies. I mean, automobiles have been around since, the turn of the century, over 125 years at this point, but people still back Tesla when it came around, right? So, I mean, you have these industries that have been around forever that people are still supporting. Why would there not be a ton of opportunity in cannabis, which really on paper in our country has only been around for 12 years?
Well, it goes to the fact, like, take Ohio for example, which is where I live. If this state were to convert tomorrow to a recreational state, there's not enough. Like, there's not enough supply to meet what the demand would be on a day-to-day basis. So that requires additional build out, new licenses, and new opportunities for new people to get involved and partner with others. Um, and some of the big issues you see in the industry is how does someone participate, like the general user that wants to participate with their, the retail shop or the cultivation shop that they work at, because they don't meet the requirements to be an investor in those sectors. But what you're seeing is there is opportunity once companies go public, and there's still a lot of upside in those public companies. And there are also, we did what's called a Reg A offering for one of our clients in the Michigan space, and that was an investment opportunity that was open to everyone. There was no accreditation requirements. It was essentially a public raise where big capital institutional investors could participate right alongside someone who just wanted to throw a few dollars into the investment. So I think you're seeing some change and some dynamics there, because there's that whole investor base that exists as well outside of the institutional and the capital investor. But for sure, if legalization comes, your private equity firms will definitely come crashing on this industry. And like, where else do you see profit margins like you do outside of cannabis? It's
Well, until
attractive for
then,
them.
the Reddit investors are going to support us, but
That's
it's
true.
Yeah, it's interesting that you call that Ohio, because when we look at this industry, it's every market kind of operates, not kind of, does operate differently. And I know there's similarities across everything, but when we look at the different markets, at least in your opinion right now, what's making markets better right now? Where you have, California, they're heavily taxed, but they have a good amount of licenses. You have Oklahoma, which was just giving out licenses with Popeye's chicken sandwiches, it's whatever it is, which is great because everybody can kind of participate in Oklahoma and then the free market takes care of itself. Or then you look at a state like where I live in Florida, where they gave out 22 licenses, only 15 people are operating in it. So we have these big, massive cannabis companies, but there's only 15 or 16 of them. Oklahoma has smaller companies, but there's 4,000 of them. So there's a lot more competition for free market. Based on the markets that you've looked at, the investment opportunities you've seen and where people are putting money, is there some kind of happy medium between Oklahoma and Florida? Is it California? What are the markets that you think are getting it right? And when we look at federal, we should start looking at the models to copy.
My personal opinion is, if you truly want a medical marketplace, so if you're a state that entered into this industry because you wanted to have cannabis available for patients for medical use, I don't know long term how you don't ultimately convert to a recreational market, because what you see, I think, in most of the states is that the medical markets are slow to meet the demographics that are needed. Ohio's a good example. We have the same qualifying factors for the most part that California had, which includes chronic pain. So almost anyone that has chronic pain would qualify for a cannabis license. Now, I know for a fact, 9 out of my 10 friends are cannabis users, but 2 of them have gotten a medical license. And when you ask why, it's because they believe there's restrictions around conceal and carry laws and other things that if they get a prescription card, they're now in violation of other statutes. It's going to impact Ohio being a big hunting state. This is just an example, but
Yeah.
if you eliminate that recreation, so what you have is a medical market that's potentially struggling to survive because it doesn't have the demographics to support it. And the only way to support that market, again, going back, is I'm a state that wants to have medical cannabis available to those that need it. You need the recreational market to support that medical market, to keep it afloat and keep it alive, so that those people that you do want to have cannabis from a medical perspective really have it available to them on a long-term basis. Like, the decision is, do you want to have a legal cannabis market or an illegal one? And the more regulations you put around it, you're just making the statement, I want to have an illegal market, because regulation drives up costs, and cost causes users to go back to where they were purchasing it before, because why would I go into a store and buy it when I can get it from the same guy I've always been buying it from, or gal for that fact?
No, you're 100% right. And it's interesting because when you have a pure medical market, the state isn't making money off of that, right? And everybody should realize this at some point. Our economy is going down, right? People have lost jobs, business are closing, people are getting loans and everything else to try to stay afloat. But at some point, the aftermath of COVID is going to hit, and states need money. Recreational cannabis is taxed and the state makes money off of that. And like you said, I imagine, a lot of states are looking at that as an option right now. But it's really interesting to look at the top. So I reference this article a lot. It was like 3 or 4 days before the end of the year, and Motley Fool put out the top 10 cannabis markets in the country. California being number 1, Colorado number 2, Michigan number 3. And then what really blew my mind, because it's a pure medical market, was Florida. So my state came in with only 455,000 patients at $1.2 billion in medical sales. So it's really interesting, whereas most medical markets, like you said, are 100% correct. They're small, they're not doing well, they can't support the demographic, and if it went rec, there would be an undersupply. I think there would be an undersupply in Florida too, but it's amazing to me that 455,000 people spent $1.2 billion in cannabis. When you look at the state that beat us, Michigan, was $1.21 billion. And I think 800 million of it was medical and 400 or 300 of it was rec. So, it's really interesting to see these demographics play out and how it's going. I'm not sure my question here, but, when we look at a state like Florida, I imagine that we're more of just a rec state under a medical license. So here you have all these people in Florida that are buying it legally, but the state's not benefiting from it. Is this an issue that other states are having too? We just happen to amplify it because we're so big?
I think that's part of it. I think Ohio is is an example of that's a medical state that really the number of qualifying factors, it would be very hard to walk in and request a card and not walk out with one, given just the, it's chronic pain and traceable pain. And then there's a number of other factors in addition to those. But the goal is to get patients medical care, because the alternative choices are much more habitual forming and detrimental to your long-term safety, those types of things. When you're looking at prescription drugs, the alternatives out there. But Florida's a weird one. I think it's just because of the size and magnitude of the state. And you get a little bit, Florida's more of a, I won't say a hodgepodge, but there is all walks of life that are coming to Florida. So unlike where you've got Midwestern mindsets in Michigan and Ohio, you get a blend of a bigger variety of individuals.
Yeah. So I know you've done, from your bio, I know you've done a lot of work in Michigan. I'm really interested in the Michigan market. Like I said, they came in at number 3 with $1.21 billion. They, obviously from a population standpoint, smaller than Colorado and California. I look at the market, I work in there for Spring Big, and seeing the way that things are shaking out there, I see Michigan being a very big potential market long term, and really a market that could potentially be modeled after. What are your thoughts on Michigan? Are they doing a good job? Are we going to see a lot of activity going on in Michigan? And, do you think they're going to hold that number 3 spot this year?
I think the answer is yes. Like, I like the fact that Michigan took a step back and said we're going to convert from a medical marketplace, a caregiver place, to a recreational market. There's regulation around their product, but it's regulation that's intended, you know, understanding what the product is. So I think having had that caregiver, Michigan, unlike a lot of legislators, had a lot more knowledge when they were going forward with the marketplace. But if you're just watching the numbers, since they've converted to recreation, and there's been a continual ramp for the most part in revenue. There's some dips that have occurred, but that's in part, I think, to some of the price compression that's occurred for really 2 reasons. The outdoor crops, obviously can be grown and sold for a lower price point, and then also I think you have some operators that are selling product just to stay afloat, so they're not doing it on a competitive basis. But I think in Michigan, what you're going to start to see is more of the pubcos start to show up where they weren't originally interested in Michigan, because I think they didn't view its potential. But now, having watched those numbers over the last 6 months, it's hard to ignore that marketplace by any means.
So when you say the pubcos are coming in, are we going to start to see a lot of M&A activity in Michigan, different smaller companies merging together to form larger chains? Are we going to see the pubcos come in and start doing acquisitions? I mean, is that what we're looking at in Michigan?
I think for sure that's what you're going to see in Michigan and across the country. I mean, these SPACs that were formed are exactly that. They're designed to go out and buy cannabis operations across the United States, and those SPACs are all going to be competing in the marketplaces that are going to be the strongest, which includes Michigan. So I think you're going to see a relatively competitive environment. You might see some of the small groups try and band together to build up and become bigger before there's some sort of acquisition. But yeah, I think it's going to be a relatively active state in the next 12 to 24 months.
Well, are we going to see that across the board this year? Because I think, when we're going into 2020, that was kind of the theme. Everyone said 2020 was going to be the year of M&A and cannabis. People are going to start buying each other out, and these companies, these large MSOs are going to grow. And what we actually saw, the pandemic happened. This industry was deemed essential. A lot of cannabis companies became very profitable. And what I see, you had your MSOs, and the good ones got bigger, and the ones that were not as good or not doing as well, and they're having their own issues. But what I kind of saw was you had this rise of the mid-market cannabis company or cannabis MSO, where they're not like a GTI where they're in so many different states and everything else, where they have a handful of locations in Colorado, a handful of locations in Michigan, a handful of locations in Pennsylvania, because they made enough money in 2020 that they're able to go to other states. Is 2021 going to be the year that 2020 was supposed to be, where we're going to see a big consolidation of companies into more MSOs across the board? And are we going to see that more at the top level with these big guys acquiring a bunch of companies in different states? Or are we going to see a lot of mergers in the mid-market area where you just have, a great company in Colorado merging with a great company in California to make an MSO to compete with a GTI or a Curaleaf or something along those lines?
Well, you recently just saw that with respect to the Verano transaction. I mean, that was a
Yeah.
merger that was brought together to take the company public. But yeah, I think you're going to see a blend of all of those things. You're going to see distressed companies that are going to get gobbled up because they weren't able to manage themselves through what I'll call the financial crisis. I mean, the one thing that 2020 did is it brought back the money to this industry. And for those that were able to survive and had some cash flowing assets, they were able to continue their build out. I mean, this industry still has a huge capital need from a build out standpoint. There's a number of clients we have in the Ohio space that still there's cultivation facilities that have not been built out. There's production licenses. Very much to what you're seeing in Florida is there's a lot of licenses out there that haven't been accessed. So I think you're going to see those opportunities to partner with those that do have capital, or to merge together and actually give themselves a bigger, better picture and story to tell, so that they can actually raise capital around it. I mean, we suggest this a lot with some of our clients that are, they're looking to raise capital. And I always say it's one thing to tell someone what you're going to do. It's another thing to show them what you've already done. So to the extent you can partner with an existing operation and start to build out, sometimes those investor meetings get a lot easier because it's easier to visualize something that's actually, you can see, you can touch, you can go visit the facilities, as opposed to a concept. So
yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens this year, because like you said, we're starting to see it already. The Alt Med in Verano was an example of that. There was a lot of other big name acquisitions towards the end of last year. And I personally think this year, just what I've seen with the industry, that there are more acquisition targets and there are more reasons for companies to merge, just like you just explained. And I think we're going to see that happening a lot. I am both excited about it and not. Like, I do want to see the little guys be able to compete and everything else, but I think there's a way for them to do it. I'm still not sold that the MSOs of today are going to be the Cokes or the Budweisers of our industry. I think that person might come out of nowhere in the next year or two, but there is a chance. So, it's interesting to see what's going to happen there.
well, the answer might be that a Coke or a Pepsi is the next person. Because I mean, if you're take for instance the alcohol and beverage companies, like the hits that they've taken in states like Colorado with reduced sales, not many companies can continue to survive those losses in their top line numbers. And the only way to solve for that is really bankruptcy, or you go buy the marketplace that's destroying yours to try and get
Yeah.
it back. So it's quite possible in the next 24 to 36 months, you're going to see a major move by a major beverage company to try and buy back some of that, either through buying up one of the MSOs or a couple of them and bring them together. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because also with legalization, you may see this halt of companies that are going to the publicly traded markets, because they're going there for capital, to convert their equity into capital to be used for acquiring companies, to be acquisitive, and also to attract institutional money, in a number of reasons. But if legalization were to occur, it is quite possible that wouldn't need to happen, because private equity is sitting on literally hundreds of billions of dollars that could be deployed into this sector. So I think you would find that there's plenty of money out there, and it might be, as we see in the healthcare sector, when there's more opportunity, when there's more money out there, then there are opportunities, and that tilt will happen. It drives up the multiples for everyone in the industry, and for those that have strong platforms or strong bases, and have money to back them and build off of it. There's definitely going to be continued opportunity.
Interesting. Let's shift focus over to the Northeast because I'm very interested in what's going to happen in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and everything else. New Jersey passed recreational cannabis. They haven't come out with the regulations yet. I'm interested to see what that's happening, but also, and this is, folks, I read a lot during the day. I don't remember everything that I read, but I thought I read something saying that Cuomo was talking about having legislation for legalizing cannabis in New York by April 1st when he has to have his budget. Now, obviously, Cuomo's got his own problems to deal with right now. We don't need to talk about that. But, it's interesting to see. I with New Jersey legalizing first, I'm like, that's a great move. They have a ton of time to make a good amount of money, through the bridges and tunnels until New York legalizes. And now New York's about to come online, or at least threatening to do so. Like, hey, we're keeping our money in the state here. How do you feel about the Northeast? Because I've said this in my office 100 times already. I said, when New York goes recreational, they will be the biggest cannabis market in the world until we have federal legalization here. And I stand behind that. I think they're going to, maybe it might take a year or two. I think they're going to make California look not silly, but they're definitely going to be number one.
Yeah, it's going to take some time to build those cultivation facilities, but when those assets start to come online, it is, I mean, it would be illogical to suggest that they're not going to be one of the biggest marketplaces in the country, and potentially the world, just based on the sheer number of people like that. That speaks to that. But it's funny. New Jersey, you made a comment, like, is New Jersey going to hurt itself if New York legalizes? And I'll make this comment, and maybe this doesn't apply to everyone, but I think it does apply to a lot of people. Is I buy my cannabis from the place that's closest to my house. I'm not I don't have a desire to drive 35 minutes, because most of the products I want, I can get at the local dispensary. This local dispensary literally is about as glamorous as a cardboard box in the inside. There's no product on the shelves. There's a board on the wall and a TV that runs through the different type of products that they have available. They have great service people that you can talk to, but it's not as sexy as a Planet 13 or a number of other cannabis stores that you can go into for a different type experience. So I think that's going to run true for the rest of the country. Is most people only go so far to see their dentist or their doctor. They try and stick close to their proximity, and that'll ring true in the cannabis sector as well.
It's interesting on that note, because I've had that conversation a lot of times, and I agree with you for the most part. I mean, for me, so in Florida, everything's vertically integrated. So if I want to get the product that I want, I've got to go to the dispensary that sells it, right? The 3 dispensaries closest to my house, and I'm not going to use names here, are not my 3 favorite. I have to go further, but I find the ones closest to my house are good enough that I'll go there until I'm ready to make a larger purchase. However, when I look at New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, that area where people are commuting, and they're commuting often, people almost have 2 sets of everything, right? They have, especially if they're working in Manhattan, they have the things in the city that are close by their office, and then they have the thing at home. So, especially as we evolve public cannabis and social cannabis consumption, I certainly see people who live in New Jersey or live in Connecticut and elsewhere and commute to the city, making purchases in the city before they head home after a work dinner or before a work dinner to consume prior. Maybe New York will be one of the largest pre-roll markets in the country. I don't know, but it's interesting to see how it's going to pan out there, because when I made this argument before New Jersey legalized, I kind of said, if New York goes first, people are going to go to the place that's closest to their office. If New Jersey goes first, they're going to buy from the place that's closest to their house. And then they're going to have a relationship there, and it's going to be familiar. And although the other place is going to legalize as well, they're going to already have that relationship and peace of mind with the first place. So I was always curious about that. It's interesting. The Northeast, to me, New York kind of invented the cannabis delivery. I mean, if anybody's ever bought black market cannabis in New York, and none of us have to admit to it, you call a guy and he'd show up on a bike with a backpack with different strains and everything else. And when we look at what we're doing today with the dispensary model, all we've done is turn those guys in New York into a store. So it's almost coming full circle with New York. Even though Cali has been cannabis forever and ever, New York has that same relationship. So I'm really interested to see what that happens. I mean, do you have a lot of people that have their eye on New York and what this market can
Oh,
look like if it goes rec this year?
for sure. New York and New Jersey are both being watched closely. And we at our law firm actually, because of all the changes across the country and new apps coming online, hired some additional lawyers in the space who would have qualify as administrative and application type lawyers who have a huge history of winning, which is something clients come in the door, want to see from the lawyers that are going to work on those types of those applications, those process, putting them together to give them the best shot. But yeah, those are going to be great markets. The one that I'm most excited to see is the first one to really pull the trigger on consumption lounges. Like, that was, um, it's been a long time, 20 plus years, but one of my favorite things about going to Amsterdam was you get to consume in public and in a cafe and in a setting just like everyone else. And when that starts to turn, I think you'll see, there's tons of opportunities into that marketplace, nightclubs, coffee shops, whatever. And I think New York is primed as anyone to roll that type of platform out.
Yeah, I can name probably a ton of rooftops in New York that I would love to smoke a joint on, and some that I have. So, it's going to be interesting how that goes. I had a good friend who got married, and then we had a party up on the rooftop of the Roxy Hotel down in Tribeca. It was a lot of fun. But on that note, consumption lounge, it's funny that you said that, because that's what I was going to want to talk to you about next is consumption lounges. I actually, in your bio, it's listed that you had worked with, I think, celebrity sponsored consumption lounges. As far as I know, I've had Sarah Stewart, Maha Hawk from the Hospitality Group on the show. West Hollywood is the only place that is allowing consumption lounges nationally. Do we have a lot of markets that are looking at this next step? Because if you think about it in reality, especially the touristy markets like Colorado and California, in reality, when you buy cannabis, you can't consume it in public. You typically really can't smoke in your hotel room unless you have a balcony or anything else. So realistically, if you're a tourist and buying cannabis, by law, there's not too many places where you can actually
Can
consume it.
consume
If
it all.
yeah. And if
Yeah.
you're a resident, where you have to consume in your house or private property. So although we've legalized the sale of cannabis, the consumption of cannabis is still highly, call it, persecuted. So how many of these markets are actually looking at regulations around consumption lounges, and how far away are we from seeing those more regular, at least in some of the more mature markets?
I mean, you're seeing Michigan take a hard look at the consumption lounges, Detroit, other cities that are starting to, move in that direction. Number of our clients have their eyes on those types of lounges. I think markets like Las Vegas, they're starting to take a serious look. I mean, a number of the dispensaries in the Vegas area built their dispensaries with the concept that they could expand into some type of consumption lounge. So you could go buy the product and then also use it on location. So I think time will tell, and that's just one of those stigmas that the legislatures like have to get comfortable with, that it's okay to consume alcohol in public. It's okay to consume cannabis in public as well.
Yeah, I mean,
So
in certain areas, it's encouraged to consume alcohol in public. There's a culture around it, a whole social culture, and I would love to see the cannabis social culture hit mainstream too. I'm sure you would
well,
also.
well, think about it. It's crazy. Like here in Ohio and a lot of other states or cities and states across the country, like it was okay for restaurants to start serving alcohol for takeout. So you could pull up, and as long as it had a plastic lid on it, they were now able to sell alcohol. So that was perfectly okay to do. So, and 12 months ago, that wasn't. So things can
Yeah.
change quickly based on perception. But it's funny, I when I first got into space, when the first, and this goes to the whole idea and stigma around cannabis and how far we've come from where we were 10 years ago, which is great. Like the the change of thought throughout the country has been fun to watch, fun to see new people experiencing a new product and something they had never done before and actually enjoying the experience. Um, but I was at this conference and we're talking about the stigmas around cannabis and changing it, using the names of flower and all these other things we were doing to try and take the negative connotations from the historical use of the word weed. And the woman I was talking to said, and then the next market is going to be mushrooms. And I looked at her, I was like, yeah, you lost me. But here we are 10 years later, and she was right, because that's the next frontier you're seeing is, okay, there are other drugs that are Schedule 1 drugs that need to be re-examined and looked at by Congress, because are they there because they're harmful, or are they there because there was some political agenda that caused them to end up on that list? So, I think it's just baby steps, and eventually we'll get to a point where it's consumption lounges and cannabis will, not be looked at as such a scary thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that point with the mushrooms because, there are people that think like, oh, one's going to lead to another, it's going to lead to another. But if you look at the trend between cannabis and mushrooms, what do they have in common? They're natural. They come out of the ground. They're grown, right? There's no, with the exception of concentrates, there's no real production that goes into cannabis. You grow it, you dry it, you trim it, you sell it, right? Yes, you can concentrate it and make oils and all this other stuff. But when you look at the truly harmful and addictive substances, there's chemistry involved, right? I mean, people have seen
Yeah.
Breaking Bad. You know what it takes to make meth. You've watched Narcos. You know what it makes to take to make cocaine and crack and all that other stuff that's highly addictive, right? There's legit chemistry involved in making these addictive substances where mushrooms and other psychedelics as well as cannabis grow naturally on the planet. And if we go back in time, pharmaceutical, I mean, a lot of pharmaceuticals have their root as plants, plant medicine. The Eastern cultures have a whole culture around plant-based medicine. And it's actually a better model because we look at our Western medicine with medications and all this stuff, it's reactive. Where this Eastern medicine and this plant-based medicine was all preventative. It's use these herbs, use these plants and everything else. So it's really interesting to see that come to fruition, both from a social and business standpoint. So are you guys getting involved in the psychedelics at all?
Yeah, we're starting to
From a legal
step.
standpoint, not
Yeah.
consuming.
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, we're stepping into that space. I think that market will likely develop very differently from the cannabis market, just because of, you can take too much of psilocybin. Like there's points where that becomes
Yeah.
dangerous if you consume. So I think there needs to be a separate set of rules and maybe a separate level of thought around that. But cannabis, can you take too much? I suppose so, but you're just gonna fall asleep or stay up all night depending who you are. So, a little bit
Yeah.
different outcome.
I think you have a higher chance of overdosing on snacks than you do of the actual cannabis. So I know I've been there. But listen, Scott, I've taken up an hour of your time. You are extremely involved in this space. You've done a lot to help architect it. We talked a little bit about 2021 and what to expect this year. But what can we look at from this industry this year? What are some of the things that excite you looking forward to 2021? That the rest of the world can get excited about as well.
I think it's just continued growth and more people coming to the industry and trying it for the first time and having positive outcomes. I mean, that to me is the way to change. The more and more people that experience cannabis and have good outcomes and fun nights and great dinners, the more and more accepted it's going to become, which makes the legislative process that much easier. Now, I'm a little nervous about what the federal government might do. I think there's good things they could do and bad things they could do. My hope is that it's not done, too quickly, and that there's a lot of thought and input that comes from not just the legislators, but the states get involved in what is the best path to making this available to everyone in the country. Because the last thing you want to see are what I'd call the pioneers destroyed because of some federal government overlay and regulation. I mean, those people that were courageous enough to jump into this industry before it was, the cool thing to do, need to be protected from any sort of outcome that comes about. So,
Yeah. No, it's, you're, again, I say this a lot, and I'm not as educated as you are on this industry and these topics, but federal legalization right now, if they were to put legislation in front of Congress, scares the shit out of me, because I truly believe that there are a few people in Congress that have a decent level of education based on the states that they're in, that
yeah.
kind of see what cannabis can do and how it should operate and everything else. But there are a lot of people who don't. And I listen. The government is the government, and this is a great country and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, our government is very reactionary. They react to things that have happened, and then they regulate based on that. They're not very good at being proactive. And people have made the joke like, "Hey, you want people to legalize cannabis? The same people that brought you the DMV. Clearly, that doesn't go that well." So, I'm scared of early federal legalization, because what does it do to our industry? What is it going to change? What's it going to do, like you said, to all these people that have been trailblazing in their states? Maybe I have that luxury, and we can call it legal privilege, because I'm in a state where I can have access to cannabis within a store. I have delivery. I'm very happy. Do we have the best products here? Maybe, maybe not. We've got some good shit. It's not California, but I can go into a store and purchase cannabis like a human being. So I'm okay with, like, hey, let's take our time and legalize, where I'm sure somebody who's in Alabama or a place where they don't even have a medical market was like, yo, Todd, shut up. I want access to this stuff. But I fear that legalization this year, maybe next, might be too early for our government to get it right. Is there a step that they can take that's not federal legalization? Is descheduling a better potential path, or maybe just decriminalizing?
If you took two things, in my opinion, one is eliminated 280E, because it's an onerous tax that really shouldn't have any application of this industry. You have a legal marketplace that's been established. 280E was designed to, you know, deny deductions for legal businesses. So that goes away. That takes a huge burden off the industry. Number two is if you could just access banking. Like those two
Yeah.
things would allow you to then, as an industry, get normalized debt, instead of, look, it's great that we have all these funds that are providing capital, but they're pretty onerous rates. And,
Yeah.
for an operator or a small operator, that's a heavy ticket to continue to punch to try and build out your business. So, if there was just access to debt, access to banking, and relief from taxes, that would be a good step in the right direction to start with.
Well, it's good to know, and I hope people watching kind of take this note. Listen, we all want to work towards federal legalization, but we want to make sure it's done right. There's been a lot of
Yep.
groundwork that's been laid by people like Scott and myself, and plenty people well before us, and well before it was even legal in any state to get here. So we want to make sure that all those efforts have not been wasted. Scott, man, this has been a great conversation. There's a lot more that I want to pick your brain about at a later date, but until then, anybody who's looking for help in the legal world, how do they find you?
You can find me at our website at dickinsonwright.com, and just type in cannabis practice and we should pop up. But hey, Todd, it's been great being on the show with you, and a lot of great questions. I had a lot of fun. So I appreciate you asking me to join.
Absolutely. Well, tell Nick when I get out to Ohio, we're gonna have to have some fun, and I will be taking plenty of trips to Michigan. So if you guys are there, you're gonna have to show me around and get me to all the good spots.
Definitely, you can count on it.
Absolutely, folks. Well, thank you. And thank you to everybody at home for watching. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. If you missed any part of this episode, it'll be live on our YouTube page on Monday at www.youtube.com/elevate your grind. Of course, if you don't want to see my pretty face, you can listen to us on any of the podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Just search for Elevate Your Grind. And if you want to check out that March 11th virtual event, check that out at joinclab.com. Folks, we are done for the night. We'll be live with you again tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, right here at facebook.com/Canna Business Group. We'll see you tomorrow.